The planet Halcyon wasn't remarkable by galactic standards. A modest orb of blue and green tucked away in the untraveled sectors of the Andarian cluster, it had little to offer to interstellar empires or mercenary traders. But to the Zarian refugees, it was salvation, a fleeting hope among the chaos of displacement and war. The Zarians, an insectoid species famed for their intricate hive cities, had once thrived on their homeworld, Axion 9. Until the hegemon fleet descended, leaving only ruins in its wake. Turka clutched the comm tablet in her spindly hands, its chirps and flashes signaling another unanswered plea. "Nothing," she said, her mandibles clicking with frustration. Not a single reply. From across the cramped hold of their makeshift colony ship, Vree tilted his angular head and gave a resigned hum. "Why would they? What do we offer? What can we pay?" He gestured with one of his segmented arms toward the viewport, the endless blackness of space a constant reminder of their isolation. "We're a swarm without a hive, Turka. Nobody cares." "Humans might," piped up Gal, the youngest of their group. His chitin glistened a fresh, iridescent green, a stark contrast to the dull, scarred exoskeletons of the elder refugees. Gal's optimism grated on Turka, but she couldn't deny it sparked a flicker of hope in their otherwise grim lot. "Humans," Vree scoffed. "They're primitives. Barely out of their planetary cradle. What could they possibly do that the Andarian Council or the Zyre Dominion wouldn't?" "They care," Gal said simply, antennae twitching as if to punctuate his point. The ship shuddered, and a warning klaxon echoed through the chamber. Turka bolted upright, her compound eyes scanning for danger. "Another hegemon patrol?" "Worse," Vree muttered as he reviewed the blinking readouts on a nearby console. "The reactor is failing. We've pushed this old junk heap too far." The grim announcement cast a pall over the group. They had only one hope, to land on Halcyon before the reactor imploded and consign them to the vacuum of space. But Halcyon wasn't ready for a crash landing, nor were its inhabitants expecting a swarm of desperate Zarians. The next few hours were a blur of frantic repairs and panicked decisions. Turka worked alongside Vree, sealing leaks with whatever scraps they could find and rerouting power to extend their descent. Through it all, Gal stayed remarkably calm, his belief in human kindness unwavering. When the ship finally broke through Halcyon's atmosphere, it did so with all the grace of a boulder skipping across a pond. The impact was deafening, and the world outside the viewport blurred into a chaos of dirt and fire. When the dust settled, Turka was the first to unstrap herself from the safety harness. "Is everyone alive?" she asked, her voice shaky. A chorus of groans and clicks confirmed their survival. Vree limped over to the viewport and peered out. "We've landed," he said flatly. "Let's see if we can survive the welcome." They emerged cautiously, their exoskeletons shimmering faintly under the light of Halcyon's twin moons. The crash site was a smoldering scar in the otherwise pristine meadow. The air smelled of scorched metal and singed flora. Turka spotted the first human within moments. A lone figure approached, silhouetted against the flickering remains of their ship. The human was tall and broad-shouldered, clad in a patchwork of armor that spoke of pragmatism rather than fashion. In their hand was a long metal rod that gleamed ominously in the moonlight. "Stay behind me," Turka hissed to the others, her spines bristling with unease. She raised her hands, a universal gesture of peace, and stepped forward. "We mean no harm," she called out, her voice resonating with the melodic tones of the Zarian tongue. The human paused, their stance softening. "You're refugees?" The voice was gruff but not unkind. "Yes," Turka replied, seizing on the thread of understanding. "Our ship, it's dying. We had no choice." The human lowered the rod and took a tentative step closer. "Name's Elias," he said, his blue eyes scanning the group with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You picked a bad time to land. Raiders have been hitting settlements nearby. Folks here are jumpy. We'll leave as soon as we can," Turka promised. "We just need a place to regroup." Elias rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You're lucky I saw the crash first. Some of the locals might not be as welcoming." He gestured toward a distant ridge. "Come with me. I'll see if I can find you shelter." Vree bristled at the idea of following the human, but Turka silenced him with a sharp glance. "We have no choice," she murmured. The journey to the human settlement was tense. Gal darted around, his antennae quivering with excitement as he peppered Elias with questions about Halcyon. The human answered patiently, though his eyes constantly scanned the horizon for threats. When they reached the settlement, it wasn't what Turka had expected. Instead of sleek, metallic buildings or towering spires, there were clusters of wooden structures reinforced with salvaged steel. It was rustic but functional, a testament to human resilience. "They'll be wary of you," Elias warned as they approached. "But I'll vouch for you." The first encounter with the human villagers was far from smooth. Suspicion hung heavy in the air as they gathered around, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. But when Elias spoke, his voice firm and commanding, they reluctantly relented, allowing the Zarians to stay. That night, as the Zarians huddled in a crude shelter, Gal's enthusiasm bubbled over. "See? Humans aren't so bad. They're helping us." Turka sighed, her gaze fixed on the stars visible through the gaps in the roof. "We'll see, Gal. Surviving the crash was one thing. But earning their trust? That might be the real challenge." Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the distant sounds of danger, sounds that promised the Zarians' troubles were far from over. The first few days in the human settlement were a delicate balancing act. The Zarians kept to themselves, repairing what they could of their equipment with the meager scraps Elias scrounged up. In return, Turka insisted they contribute to the community by assisting with labor, carrying heavy supplies with their powerful limbs or crafting intricate tools using their fine motor skills. Even so, unease lingered in the air like a thick fog. Turka knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The humans watched them warily from behind windows and barricades, their suspicion palpable. At the center of this storm of mistrust was Marcus, the village leader. A wiry man with a sharp gaze and a voice like gravel, he made it clear he didn't trust the newcomers. "They'll bring trouble," Marcus growled during a tense meeting in the village square. "I've seen what happens when outsiders show up unannounced. Raiders follow. Or worse." Elias stood his ground, his broad shoulders squared. "They're just trying to survive, Marcus. Same as us. You'd do the same if you were in their position." The debate raged on, but Marcus's words sparked an uncomfortable truth: the Zarians weren't safe here. And neither were the humans, if tensions escalated. The first sign of real trouble came one crisp morning when Gal burst into the shelter, his antennae trembling. "Raiders," he cried, his voice high-pitched and frantic. "They're coming this way." Turka bolted upright, her spines flaring with alarm. "Are you sure?" "I saw them from the ridge." Gal stammered. "They're heavily armed. At least 3 skiffs." Vree cursed under his breath. "This is it. The humans will blame us. They'll think we brought the raiders here." Elias barged into the shelter moments later, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said, confirming Gal's report. "Marcus wants to fight, but our defenses won't hold against a force that size." Turka felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. If the humans fought and lost, it would mean disaster for everyone. If they surrendered, the raiders would strip the settlement bare, leaving them all with nothing. And if the Zarians ran, well, that option wasn't even on the table. They couldn't abandon the people who had reluctantly taken them in. "We have to help," Turka said firmly, her resolve cutting through the murmur of panic among her group. "Help?" Vree snapped. "We barely survived the crash, Turka. What can we possibly do?" "We're stronger than they are," Turka replied, her tone brooking no argument. "And we've got skills they don't. If we don't stand with them now, we'll never earn their trust, or our place here." Elias nodded, his respect for Turka evident. "I've got a plan. It's risky, but if we can pull it off, we might just make it out of this." The plan was simple in theory but daunting in execution. the Zarians would use their agility and natural camouflage to set traps along the narrow paths leading into the settlement. Meanwhile, Elias and a small group of human fighters would create a diversion, drawing the raiders' attention away from the village itself. As the Zarians worked, their tensions with the humans began to melt away. Turka noticed villagers tentatively offering help, passing tools or helping to lift heavy barricades. Even Marcus, though still skeptical, lent his expertise in crafting improvised explosives from scrap. When the raiders arrived, they came with the swagger of predators accustomed to easy prey. Their skiffs, rusted and menacing, belched smoke as they rumbled into the pass. Their leader, a burly alien with skin like cracked stone, barked orders to his crew, confident in their overwhelming firepower. But the traps were already in place. The first explosion was a thunderclap that shook the ground, flipping one of the skiffs onto its side. The raiders scattered in confusion, only to be ensnared by concealed nets woven from Zarian silk, an innovation Gal had suggested. Panic rippled through their ranks as more traps sprang to life, pits disguised with brush, tripwires triggering showers of shrapnel, and smoke bombs that turned the pass into a disorienting nightmare. Elias and his team struck next, emerging from their hiding spots with a ferocity that caught the raiders off guard. Armed with rifles and improvised weapons, the humans fought with a desperation born of protecting their home. Turka and her group joined the fray, their natural armor deflecting blows and their speed turning them into blurs of motion. Gal, to everyone's surprise, proved to be a fierce combatant, darting between skirmishes to disable raider equipment with astonishing precision. The battle was chaotic and brutal, but the raiders had underestimated their quarry. With each passing moment, their confidence eroded until their leader, bellowing in rage, called for a retreat. The surviving raiders scrambled back to their skiffs and sped away, leaving the pass littered with the debris of their defeat. When the dust settled, the mood in the village was electric. Cheers erupted as the villagers emerged from their hiding places, their fear replaced by exhilaration. Marcus, for the first time, approached Turka directly. "I'll admit," he said grudgingly, "I didn't think you'd stick around. Let alone fight." "We're not here to take," Turka replied, her voice steady. "We're here to survive. And that means helping each other." Elias clapped a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Maybe now you'll believe me when I say they're not so different from us." The victory came at a cost. Several villagers were injured, and the Zarians had exhausted their few remaining resources, but it was a victory nonetheless. As night fell, the humans and Zarians gathered around a communal fire, sharing stories and rations. Gal, his excitement undimmed, chattered about the traps they'd used and the way the raiders had fled. For the first time, the humans laughed with him instead of at him. Even Marcus cracked a rare smile. Turka watched it all unfold with a mix of relief and determination. The battle had proven they could work together, but it was only the beginning. The Zarians still had much to prove, and danger still loomed beyond the horizon. For now, though, they had earned a fragile peace. And that, Turka thought, was worth fighting for. The morning after the battle dawned with an uneasy quiet. The victory against the raiders had bought the village time, but the cost was clear: shattered defenses, depleted supplies, and a grim sense that the danger was far from over. Turka stood at the edge of the settlement, her antennae twitching as she scanned the horizon. Elias joined her, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "They'll come back," he said without preamble. "The raiders don't like losing. And when they do, they hit harder." Turka nodded. "We need a plan. A real plan. Something that won't just push them back, but will make them think twice about ever coming here again." Elias grunted in agreement. "We'll need more than traps and luck this time." The villagers, still basking in the glow of their victory, were reluctant to acknowledge the looming threat. Marcus, ever the pessimist, voiced what many were thinking during a tense meeting that afternoon. "We can't fight them again," he said, pacing in front of the gathered humans and Zarians. "We barely survived the first attack. If they return with reinforcements, we're finished." "We survived because we worked together," Turka countered, her voice firm. "If we stand united, we can do more than survive. We can win." "How?" Marcus challenged, his arms crossed. "You've seen what we're up against. We don't have the weapons, the numbers, or the tech." Elias stepped forward, his tone measured. "We might not have what they do, but we have something better, brains and guts. And I've got an idea." The plan Elias proposed was audacious, borderline reckless, but it was their best shot. Instead of waiting for the raiders to attack, they would strike first. Using the intel gleaned from the captured raider skiff, they would locate the enemy's base and launch a preemptive assault. The goal wasn't to wipe them out, an impossible task, but to cripple their operations and send a clear message: Halcyon wasn't worth the trouble. The Zarians would play a critical role. Their agility and natural stealth made them ideal for reconnaissance and sabotage. Meanwhile, the humans would provide a distraction, drawing the bulk of the raiders away from their base. It was a gamble, but one that could tip the odds in their favor. Preparations began immediately. Turka led a scouting team of Zarians, including the ever-eater Gal, to locate the raider base. The journey was grueling, with the group traversing dense forests and treacherous terrain. Along the way, Turka couldn't help but notice how Gal's boundless energy buoyed the others, even in the face of exhaustion. After 2 days of travel, they found it, a sprawling encampment built into the side of a rocky cliff, bristling with weapons and teeming with raiders. Turka's compound eyes flickered as she took in the scene, her mind racing to catalog every detail: the locations of sentries, the layout of the defenses, the weak points they could exploit. "We're going to need a miracle to pull this off," Vree muttered as they retreated to relay the information to Elias. "Not a miracle," Turka replied, her voice resolute. "Just a good plan." Back at the settlement, Elias and Turka worked late into the night, refining the details of the attack. Gal, to everyone's surprise, contributed several clever ideas, including a way to use Zarian silk to disable the raiders' vehicles. Even Marcus, reluctantly drawn into the effort, offered insights from his years of skirmishing with rival human factions. When the day of the assault arrived, the air was thick with tension. The humans and Zarians exchanged solemn glances as they prepared to part ways, one group heading to the cliffs to sow chaos, the other preparing to lure the raiders into an ambush. Elias clasped Turka's shoulder before they departed. "Be careful out there." "You too," she replied, her mandibles clicking softly. The attack began under the cover of darkness. Turka and her team moved like shadows, slipping past sentries and planting charges on key structures. Gal, who had insisted on being part of the sabotage team, worked with surprising efficiency, his smaller frame allowing him to squeeze into tight spaces unnoticed. The first explosion rocked the camp just before dawn, shattering the morning stillness and throwing the raiders into disarray. Fires erupted as fuel stores ignited, and the screams of panicked raiders echoed through the cliffs. It was the signal for Elias and his team to strike. They emerged from the forest with a roar, drawing the raiders' attention away from the saboteurs. Bullets and energy blasts lit up the pre-dawn gloom as the humans fought with a ferocity that belied their smaller numbers. Inside the camp, the Zarians worked furiously to complete their mission. Turka and Vree destroyed a communication relay, cutting off the raiders from reinforcements. Gal, in a moment of daring, scaled a guard tower and used a spool of silk to jam the barrel of a massive energy cannon. But the raiders were quick to regroup. A heavily armored squad stormed the camp, forcing the Zarians into a desperate retreat. Turka fought with everything she had, her claws flashing in the firelight, but the odds were overwhelming. Just when it seemed they might be cornered, Elias appeared, leading a group of humans who had broken through the raider lines. Together, they carved a path to safety, retreating into the forest as the raider camp burned behind them. By the time the sun rose, the battle was over. The raider base was in ruins, their vehicles disabled, and their morale shattered. The surviving raiders fled into the wilderness, too demoralized to mount a counterattack. Back at the settlement, the returning fighters were met with cheers and tears of relief. For the first time, humans and Zarians celebrated as one community, united by their shared struggle and victory. Marcus, who had fought alongside the others, approached Turka with a rare smile. "I didn't think you'd pull it off," he admitted. "Guess I was wrong." Turka tilted her head, her mandibles twitching in a semblance of a smile. Guess we're not so different after all. Elias raised a cup of scavenged ale, his voice booming over the crowd. To Halcyon, he declared. And to the ones who stood with us when no one else would. The villagers and Zarians raised their cups in unison, their voices joining in a triumphant cheer. For now, they had won their freedom and, more importantly, each other's trust. But Turka couldn't shake the feeling that their fight for survival was only just beginning. The days following the raid were filled with an uneasy quiet. The raiders had been driven off, their base destroyed, but everyone knew this wasn't the end. Halcyon was still vulnerable, its defenders battered and resources stretched thin. Turka felt the weight of their tenuous victory in every exhausted glance exchanged between villagers and Zarians. We won the battle, Vree muttered as they worked to patch up the settlement's outer wall, but the war's not over. It never is, Turka replied, securing a heavy wooden beam with Zarian silk. Her mind was already spinning with ways to make their defenses more effective. They couldn't rely on Elias's ingenuity or their own bravery alone. If the raiders returned with reinforcements, they'd need more than traps and grit to survive. Elias, ever the optimist, had another idea. What if we turn the tables for good, he suggested during a council meeting in the village square. His voice carried a spark of hope that seemed out of place among the grim faces of the gathered humans and Zarians. Marcus frowned. What do you mean, for good? We're hanging by a thread here, Elias. Elias leaned forward, his eyes bright. The raiders only have power because they're organized and armed. But we just proved they're not invincible. What if we took this chance to build something stronger, a real alliance between us and the Zarians? The room fell silent. Turka's antennae twitched, sensing the tension in the air. She spoke carefully. An alliance means trust. Cooperation. Some of us, her compound eyes flicked toward Marcus, are still struggling with that. Marcus bristled but said nothing. An alliance also means strength, Elias continued. We combine what we're good at. Humans are resourceful. Zarians have skills and resilience we can't match. Together, we're better than either of us alone. Gal, always eager, chimed in. And we can start by fortifying the village. If the raiders come back, we'll be ready. And maybe we can show other settlements they don't have to face the raiders alone. Turka felt a surge of pride in the young Zarian. His optimism had always seemed naive, but now, it was contagious. It wasn't easy convincing everyone to agree. Marcus argued that an alliance would stretch their already thin resources. Some villagers feared the Zarians would outstay their welcome or bring more trouble to their doorstep. But as the days passed, the shared work of rebuilding began to erode those fears. The Zarians proved invaluable. Their silk strengthened the village's barricades, their precision crafting improved tools and weapons, and their unique physiology allowed them to perform tasks the humans couldn't. Meanwhile, the humans shared their knowledge of Halcyon's terrain and resources, teaching the Zarians how to forage for food and find safe water sources. Turka and Elias worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going, mediating disputes and encouraging collaboration. Even Marcus, begrudgingly, began to see the value of the partnership. One evening, as he watched Gal teach a group of children how to weave nets, he approached Turka. I still don't like it, he admitted, his voice low. But maybe Elias is right. Maybe we've got a shot at making this work. Turka tilted her head, her mandibles clicking softly. It's a start. But the uneasy peace was shattered just days later. Scouts spotted a large raider force approaching, a mix of ground vehicles and skiffs bristling with weapons. This time, they weren't coming to plunder. They were coming for revenge. The news sent the settlement into a frenzy. Villagers scrambled to prepare, reinforcing walls and stockpiling what little ammunition they had. Turka and Elias gathered their fighters, human and Zarian alike, and laid out a desperate plan. We can't outgun them, Elias said, his tone grave. But we can outsmart them. Turka nodded. We draw them into the village, force them into tight spaces where their numbers won't matter. Use every trick we have, traps, ambushes, anything that gives us an edge. The night before the battle, the settlement was eerily quiet. Families huddled together, Xerians and humans sharing stories and food. Gal sat with a group of human children, weaving silk bracelets and promising them that everything would be fine. His confidence was unshakable, and Turka wondered if it was for their sake or his own. When the raiders arrived at dawn, they found a village transformed. The once ramshackle walls were reinforced with steel and silk, bristling with spikes and makeshift barriers. Smoke bombs obscured the air, creating a haze that confused their targeting systems. As the raiders advanced, they fell into trap after trap. Pits lined with sharpened stakes, nets that snared their vehicles, and hidden explosives that turned their formations into chaos. The defenders fought fiercely, every corner of the village a battlefield. Xerians darted through the melee, their agility making them elusive targets, while humans held choke points with grim determination. Turka faced the raider leader in the heart of the village. The alien towered over her, its cracked stone skin glinting in the firelight. It swung a massive blade, and Turka barely dodged, her claws scraping against its armor. The fight was brutal, each blow a test of her endurance and resolve. When the moment came, it was Gal who tipped the scales. Darting in from behind, he used a strand of silk to ensnare the raider's weapon arm, giving Turka the opening she needed. With a final, desperate lunge, she drove her claws into the raider's chest, sending it crashing to the ground. The remaining raiders, leaderless and demoralized, broke ranks and fled. The village erupted into cheers as the defenders realized they had won. As the smoke cleared, the cost of victory became evident. Several villagers and Xerians lay injured, and the settlement bore new scars. But they had survived. Together. That evening, as the village celebrated, Elias stood beside Turka at the edge of the square. "We did it," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We actually did it." Turka's mandibles twitched in a semblance of a smile. "We stood together. That's what made the difference." Gal, limping but grinning, joined them. "Do you think the raiders will come back?" "They'll think twice," Elias said with a smirk. "And if they do, we'll be ready." As the stars emerged in the night sky, Turka felt a rare sense of peace. They had found more than safety on Halcyon. They had found a home, and allies willing to fight for it. "Maybe," she said softly, "this is the start of something bigger. Something worth building." Elias raised his cup in agreement, and the three of them watched as humans and Xerians shared stories around the fire, the barriers between them finally beginning to fade. For the first time in a long time, Turka felt hope, not just for her people, but for all of them.